When temperatures hit 45 degrees Celsius, the ground physically begins to fracture. In this rural village, the heat wave has devastated the local agriculture and brought daily infrastructure to a grinding halt. When Pihu arrived from the city, the locals expected her to last barely 24 hours. They assumed her urban background would leave her helpless against the relentless sun and the lack of electricity. But Pihu looked past the dying fields and noticed a geographic anomaly. A single lush green hill stood unaffected by the drought, completely out of place in the scorched landscape. Environmental pressure often wears down a community's perspective. It usually takes an outsider to investigate the physical clues that locals have learned to ignore. The village had avoided that hill for decades. Local folklore described a cursed cave protected by an unseen presence, a story that effectively kept the community away from the only thriving vegetation in the region. This logic tree maps out Pihu's deduction. While the village was a dead end, the green hill indicated two physical certainties: a consistent water table and deep shade. To her, this wasn't a haunt, it was a thermal safe haven. She dismissed the superstitions and convinced her family to pack their essentials. Despite their hesitation, they began the move toward the forbidden zone. Crossing the threshold of the cave triggers a sudden physical shock. The oppressive air temperature drops the moment you step out of the overexposed sunlight and into the deep rock shadows. Local legends frequently function as psychological barriers, walling off vital resources from those who rely on folklore rather than investigation. This cross-section shows why the interior stays cold. Thick rock walls act as thermal mass, absorbing solar energy so slowly it never reaches the inner cavity. Additionally, an adjacent waterfall releases cool vapor that cycles through the enclosed space, continuously lowering the ambient temperature. Pihu began organizing the space by gathering flat stones to construct a mortarless stove, fitting the rocks into the cave's natural grooves to create a stable cooking surface. This 3D wireframe shows the ventilation hack. A PVC pipe captures the red smoke from the stove and funnels it out through a rock fissure, while the blue arrows show the cold air remaining trapped at ground level. She also utilized the nutrient-dense, moist soil at the cave's mouth to plant seeds, taking advantage of the constant humidity for a small agricultural plot. By applying basic engineering to local thermodynamics, Pihu turned a site of local terror into a functioning, climate-controlled living space. A violent night storm tested the family's resolve. High winds thrashed the trees outside, creating booming, rhythmic noises that echoed through the cavern. Her family immediately attributed the sounds to the cave's haunting legend. Pihu, however, began tracking the noise to its exact physical source. This top-down view shows the cave's megaphone effect. Wind waves enter through a narrow external gap and amplify into heavy sound waves as they hit the main chamber's specific geometry. The supernatural tension evaporated as soon as the sounds were mapped to the physics of the wind and the rock. Exploring the cave's deeper recesses, Pihu and her husband found a hidden, sealed room. Inside was a wooden trunk buried under decades of dust. The trunk contained a yellow diary. The handwriting across its pages detailed the actual history of the hill. The diary belonged to a homeless ancestor of a current villager. He had found the cave decades ago while looking for a way to survive the summer heat without a house of his own. To prevent wealthier neighbors from seizing the cave, he deliberately fabricated and spread the stories of the haunting. The legend was a calculated defense mechanism to protect his only shelter. The ghost story was a social shield, forged by a man who used the village's own fears to secure his privacy. When the diary's contents were shared, the village's generational fear was replaced by a collective interest in the cave's resources. Pihu's setup proved the site's value. The vegetable seedlings matured in the dark, moist soil, providing reliable food during the drought. This single season in the shade showed the village that the most dangerous part of the hill was the story they told themselves about it. Turning an avoided landscape into a resource simply required looking past the folklore and into the physics of the site.